What person did you watch turn into something they were not? I had a best friend who was honestly one of the nicest people on the planet, but due to depression and peer pressure from toxic people, she began shoplifting and getting into drugs. She stopped caring about people and started doing such risky things that I couldn't even hang out with her without feeling unsafe. She ended up getting me in so much trouble one time, that her mom, who considered me another daughter, told me that we had to separate to protect me from harm and trouble. I miss her family cause they really were another family to me, but she refused to take responsibility and continued being put in dangerous situations. I have a friend from my childhood whose parents really went down the wrong path. I played sports with him and was in school with him from age 3 to graduation. His dad was always his biggest supporter and always sat next to my parents at every game. He was seriously such a nice guy. When we got into high school, this kid's house was the hangout. Nobody knocked, and at any given time there would be 5 to 10 kids hanging out there. In my 4 years of high school, I watched his dad go from a fun-loving, easygoing dude who loved his kids, to a guy who steals and robs to get his hands on any drug he could put into his body. We took in my friend to live with us when his dad skipped bail and was the subject of a statewide manhunt. It got to the point where he was doing drugs in the house with his oldest son. Seriously, one of the saddest things I've ever seen. After my tight-laced, pearl-wearing great-aunt had a stroke, she turned into a foul-mouthed, swearing sailor. So sad, yet so flippin' hilarious. One of my classmates grew up and decided he was going to be a cowboy. Hat, boots, occasionally chaps, which is fine, except having grown up with him I can pretty safely say he's never worked or lived on any type of farm or ranch, and I'm pretty sure he's never even ridden a horse. We are from a very small town and he didn't associate with the horse. He was the emo/punk kid. And everyone liked him for it, he was considering super cool. Now he's a fake cowboy, and most of his hometown friends actually do farm or ranch, and we all know that he doesn't. I don't get it. But it's embarrassing watching him throw around country jargon that doesn't make sense. I don't know why he's trying so hard, and I don't know where this came from. One of my best friends from childhood ended up with schizophrenia. I watched him turn from a killer musician-loving friend and trendsetter into a delusional paranoid that refused to take psych meds but self-medicated with alcohol. Same with my brother. He was a super gifted engineer and a nice, fun-loving guy. Untreated schizophrenia turned him into a paranoid, arrogant, misogynistic asshole. I will never forget the first time I interacted like him after the change. It really felt like my brother died and complete dickhead was left behind. I feel so bad for him, but he is so hard to be around or try to help. An former high school friend with 80 to 85% average in class, turned into a Hells Angels in his 20s or 30s, murdered people, then died by homicide. Those events took place a very long time ago. I didn't know they were actually criminals. I always thought they were more like divorced dads going through midlife crisis. Some of them look like really cool people. Does anyone have a positive story of change, because these are depressing? My father used to beat the crap out of me as a kid. My siblings too. Purely randomly he would come home late at night, completely sober, and beat the shit out of us because he felt like something had been done incorrectly. At about 40 years old he went out one day and bought a drift boat and started fishing. He hasn't been the same since. He is still boisterous and sometimes crosses lines verbally, but he is generally quick to apologize and has been learning ever since. I didn't realize people could change. My mom. She went from your average stay-at-home denim jacket wearing Canadian mother who loved coffee and angel statues and would listen to upbeat optimistic songs like Walking on Sunshine and Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow, and turned into an alcoholic leather jacket hoarder that partied every day of the week and collected band and beer memorabilia and only ever listened to music about drinking, fucking and being on drugs when she met my stepdad when I was 11. Things went from her taking care of me and parenting me, to me having to grow up real fast so I could take care of her and parent myself. Oddly enough though, the pandemic has turned her around again. Being in quarantine and not being able to have 20 people over every night has made her desire to drink flatline and also given her plenty of time to go through and clean out her house. I'm proud of her right now, but I'm also worried that she'll wind up reverting as soon as COVID's over and she can see her friends again. All I can do is hope that her progress will stick. My dad was a surgeon/doctor who was a partner in his very well-respected practice. He was sought out for consultations by pharmaceutical companies all over the world and remains highly respected in his field. On top of this, he was always very put together, clean-shaven, buttoned up to the point where my mom's friends asked if he was metrosexual back when they met. After retirement, he got into farming and fishing, spends all day every day working on his plants or boat, and is almost always wearing stained clothes. He's still incredibly intelligent and well-spoken, but OMG is it funny to see this surgeon who was always so put together and urbane become an old farmer. My friend joined Mary Kay, need I say more? I have a friend who got into Herbalife. She went from having a steady marketing job to literally every conversation she has with anyone ever, she tries to sell that shit to you. She's also now an influencer and a personal trainer without having any experience or training whatsoever. She's a lawsuit away from losing it all. My mom's cousin. She's passed on now, but there was a time when she was so fun-loving, happy, and genuinely confident. Then, after about 20 years together, her long-term boyfriend had what I now think was a midlife crisis. He was in his 50s hanging out with women 25 to 30 years younger than him, and making it really obvious he was attracted to them. She wanted to keep his attention, so she grew her hair out, wore more suggestive clothing, and developed both an eating disorder and a pill addiction. She was wearing clothes made for 5-year-old girls. Eventually, her problems got so out of control that her boyfriend kicked her out. She got into a car wreck that completely totaled her car, and she overdosed twice on my sister's medication in my home. My dad let her rent my grandpa's old house from him, and ended up having to kick her out because she was so high on pills that she left food cooking far too long on the stove and almost burned the house down. It didn't help that her other cousins constantly yelled at her and treated her like a child. At the time all this happened, I was a little too young to understand emotional trauma, and I spent a lot of time angry at her for letting her life get so out of control. I now feel really bad, but I'm thankful her last couple of years were lived happily with her son in another state and she got back to a healthy weight. At school there was a lad. He was a nice guy, but school was not for him. He was the class joker and kept us entertained. He pulled some wild crazy stunts and was uncontrollable. The teachers hated him and he was often in trouble and being suspended. Towards the end of schooling he was never in and kind of dropped out. Like I said, he was a nice lad, not a bully. Plus his home life was not very good at all. We all thought that he would not amount to much. Fast forward 10 years, he has a nice family, married with 2 children. Lives in a nice house in a decent area. Runs his own business which looks to be doing very well, and he is very well respected in the community. Sadly this year he was in a car accident and died. I've watched all 3 of my older brothers become addicted to drugs and alcohol. The oldest has now been clean for many, many years. But when he was using he'd be violent and scary. The middle just recently fell off the wagon and went from being a hard worker to being fired from his job, out all hours of the night, and just acting like a madman. The third is now on his 3rd wife. He abandoned his first wife and their kids for his mistress and never paid child support. Rarely contacts us, and if he does he called mom the N-word, we're white, and other names. My whole life, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She never worked at all, even though my family honestly needed the extra income. Most days she wouldn't even do household chores, just sit around watching TV or go shopping. Whenever my dad hinted at her getting a job she would claim nothing will get done around the house. I need to stay at home to cook and clean. Then my parents decided to move to a small town, and my dad couldn't find work. My mom did an online course and found a job straight away, and now she works full-time. I'm so proud of her. Her first full-time job at aged 50 and she absolutely loves it. Basic training, we all had our heads shaved, wore uniform, etc. Sweetest guy in the squadron, super nice, thoughtful, soft-spoken. First day wearing civvies, civilian clothes, dude walks out with black lipstick, spiked dog collar, and some angry t-shirt. Day I realized that you can't judge a book by its cover. That was a pretty common experience in the army. Dudes would become BFFs in basic training, then graduation rolls around and one dude is in goth gear, another in Wranglers and a cowboy hat, and another in an oversized jersey and flat-billed cap. Then they all walk away, in step with each other. Always been proud of my work ethic. I'm usually upfront, hardworking and hate gossip. I joined a large not-for-profit 22 months ago. The culture at the time was amazing, but 2 months in there was a complete leadership restructure, all the way down to my manager. The new management chain all knew each other from another not-for-profit that the new CEO had led. He had deliberately brought everyone over to our much larger organization, firing existing dedicated staff and replacing with incompetent fools. The whole culture changed. Overnight it became bitchy and toxic. Common practice became to blame all shortfalls on either A, the former leadership, or B, the current board of directors, who were trying to maintain the former positive culture. If you didn't bitch about those groups, you became persona non grata in the eyes of leadership. I watched myself join them over 4 months. I trashed my former manager, the kindest, most gentle man you've ever worked for, who gave me a shot there. I trashed the former general counsel, an amazing woman who sacrificed a 7-figure salary in a large law firm to come and support our charity. Eventually I realized that I didn't like who I became and I started standing up for it. I called it unprofessional when the bitching started and I refused to engage. 3 months later I got fired. Management and their collaborators in my team conspired to fire me because I was the source of a toxic culture. Now 3 months on, I am working in a new company. I am super wary about fraternizing with any colleague, but I can at least hold my head up high. I also called my former manager and the former general counsel, owner, up to my pet in everything and told them what happened. I feel honestly blessed that they both forgave me. When my nan, who half raised me, got dementia, it was a horrific sight. Mostly bedridden, she had no grasp on reality. This fierce firecracker of a woman whose worst fear was to lose her mind. It happened, and it happened in spectacular fashion. The most disturbing thing about it to me was how cruel she could be. She said terrible, unforgivable things to all of us at various points while she still knew who we were. We understood it wasn't her. My God. She was the kindest woman in the world. But it was still painful. Weirdly, she came back a little cognitively in her last week. Her last words to me were, "Hello, little one. I love you. You look beautiful." Then as I was leaving, she said to my aunt, "Quick, Laura's going to miss the bus to school." Regressed a decade or two there, Nan, but hey, that's okay. It was the first time she'd said my name in 2 years. I wish I could have stayed with her. We knew she had days, if that. But it was complicated. My mum was sick and her grief overwhelmed her. She couldn't handle it, and I wasn't going to leave Mum alone. So I walked away from the house I grew up in and the woman who was basically my dad, for the last time. Walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done. 9 years later, the whole thing is still so painful. I would never recommend home caring someone with dementia, Parkinson's. It was good Nan got to die at home, but I know she'd trade that if she knew what caring for her did to the family. She needed nurses and doctors and care from those whose hearts weren't broken. I miss her so fucking much. TLDR, Nan, who half raised me, had dementia. My story is like millions probably. Dementia and Parkinson's is a goddamn nightmare.